This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
Hey everybody, this is Razib Khan with the Unsupervised Learning Podcast, and today I'm here with Dr. Coltan Scrivner of Arizona State. He is a psychologist there, and he has written a book called Morbidly Curious. I know Coltan a little bit. He's come through Austin, and he's collaborated with some friends of mine, and so I knew about this project. I think like 2 years ago now that I first heard about it. So it's a long time in coming. I think more than 2 years ago actually. You've been working on the research for this, and you were working on the book, and I knew that you were working on it. It was going to come out, and finally it came out. You sent me the PDF. I think I read it a while ago, though. You were done a while ago.
Yeah, I finished. You finished like a year before the actual publication date. I think I sent you like an early copy of it.
Yeah. So I got a galley, but I mean, I'm sure it's roughly what's at the end. So you have a book out, and it's called Morbidly Curious. And I know that you were doing research. You were doing research at haunted houses, like what is it? Those Halloween haunted houses and stuff like that. And I'm pretty sure your publisher timed it, not too much before Halloween for a reason, right?
Yeah. I think that's how I met you. I was in Austin doing research at a haunted house.
Yes.
And we met up at a big gathering. October's a really good time to publish a book. It's a very sought after month because people are buying in preparation for the holidays. Yeah, and so as a debut author, you don't usually get prime time like that. And but I made the argument to them that, hey, I get a lot of interviews anyway for Halloween, for people's Halloween stories. And I said, obviously with the title of the book and with that, I can promote it pretty easily if you release it at the right time. So finally they agreed and gave it a perfect release date in early October.
Yeah. And so, this is an interesting topic because I think different people have different reactions to haunted films and terror and all these things. For example, I'm not like a big horror fan, but I'm not scared of it. I know people who basically will not watch horror films. They will not watch them. Yeah. I enjoy them, some of them. And actually, when I was a kid, I don't know why this is. I grew up in the 1980s. I'm a little older than you. I don't know why this is, but I feel like, I have some hypotheses, some cultural hypotheses. But for kids in the 1980s, and I'm talking, I was an elementary schooler, we watched a lot more, I feel, horror movies than kids today or even in the 90s. I don't know why that is. So Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm in elementary school and we're talking about Nightmare on Elm Street, I know they're R-rated, but you see kind of censored versions of them.
They play them on TV, right?
Or uncensored, because and then there was the Halloween movies, which were pretty weird. So the Halloween movies and Nightmare and Freddy Krueger. And then Jason and the Halloween movies were kind of icons when I was a kid. And then there were movies that were not traditional horror, but there were movies that came out after Jaws where it was basically the scary animal,
Right.
So there are movies about a grizzly bear that a massive grizzly bear that kills people, all sorts of things. So this was and then there's movies like Carrie, which that's horror as well. I just feel like there's a lot of iconic films from about maybe the late 60s to the early around 1990, and then it kind of dropped off, and I felt like there were some horror films and there are some profitable feature films that are horror, but it's more of a B movie thing just to make a profit, as opposed to a cultural phenomenon. They never became the big tent poles, the comic book heroes. Obviously comic book movies, they are not horrifying. There might be a few scary aspects there, but they're I mean, in the Marvel movies, like very few people die. Like some people do,
Right.
but it's rare.
Well, it's a different kind of dying, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you think about
It's
it,
not
like,
gory.
well, even if it is, it's still a different kind of thing. So, I mean, I've got a paper under review right now, trying like an attempt to define the horror genre sort of scientifically. If you think about an action movie and what an action movie is, there's a superhero and a supervillain. And a good action movie, the superhero and supervillain, or the group of superheroes and a supervillain, are pretty equally matched, right? That's what makes it an action movie. It's like a dominance competition in nature. In a horror movie, you don't have that. You have a very vulnerable protagonist and a very powerful antagonist. So very highly formidable villain, very low formidability protagonist. And that, I think, is like the essence of the horror genre. And you see that in like Halloween, right? Michael Myers is pretty much unstoppable. It's where you get the final girl trope from. All the final girls, they're survivors, but they're very much like low formidability, vulnerable. Maybe over the course of a couple sequels, they kind of learn how to fight back, but they're never powerful like the villain is, right? In action movies, you kind of have from the start or from early on in the movie, the hero is a hero, right? He's equally matched with the villain. And so I think with horror, you do see this a different kind of relationship between the protagonist and the antagonist. That's what makes it frightening to us. It sort of triggers those predator-prey circuits in the brain that have evolved for hundreds of millions of years across almost all animals.
Yeah, that's that's a fascinating point because it's kind of like these power imbalances that you're talking about. I feel like in hunting, for example,
Yeah.
sometimes you think like, oh, that's not sporting, and that basically means that you have to have a situation where the animal can defeat you in a way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes I see videos of hunting where the animal turns the table on the person.
Right.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm just like, you go. You know? Not because
Yeah.
like I eat meat.
Humans hate unfairness, right?
Yeah.
Humans hate unfairness. Doesn't matter how it is. They hate and unfair fights are the worst, right? They
Yeah.
like hate that the most.
So I eat meat. I don't have a problem with hunting actually.
Yeah.
But you know that, in most hunting, I mean not most hunting, in almost all hunting, the best that the animal can do is basically a draw.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But
Well,
then
and it is
sometimes they flip it and you're like, wow.
well, that's why big game hunting or like safari hunting is so sought after by wealthy people, right? It's not necessarily because it's because they're rare animals, but oftentimes they try to shoot or try to hunt dangerous rare animals, right? Or animals that could kill you, which is not the case typically when you're hunting deer. Maybe if you go moose hunting, moose are pretty scary. But for the most part, you're hunting like the ones they prize are like lions and tigers and elephants and like things that are large or dangerous and could kill you. It makes them, gives you a sense of like a slight sense of danger, even if you're probably like often not in true danger. But those are the ones we hear about where it's like, oh, rich dentist so I think it was a dentist like a few years ago went safari hunting and got eaten by a lion or mauled by a tiger or something like that. And people were like cheering for the big cat there because finally, like, when you're pitted up against an animal that's preyed on your species for like a few 100,000 years and your ancestors for millions of years, it feels right that they win, right? It feels right that the tiger or the lion wins.
And so in a way, if I was a tiger watching a safari expedition, it's kind of like a horror movie.
It would be, yeah.
Because that's what it is psychologically. You identify with the weak, with the far weaker entity. And then in very rare exceptional cases, the tables are turned.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like a climactic finale.
Yeah. And even in hunting, humans are weaker than a lot of the animals they hunt, right? Like just raw power, put them in a cage, Twitter poll who's going to win, the gorilla or the man or whatever, right? They're weaker, but if you give them a gun, instantly their formidability goes up, right? And there's a lot of really interesting research on perceived formidability. So Dan Fessler, I don't know if you know him, but he's done a lot of work on this. How does our mind sort of map formidability, or what things can modify it? And weapons are one of them. So if you show someone a picture of a hand holding like a stick, and then show other people, a picture of a hand holding a pistol, the hand holding the pistol, the participants will imagine that person holding it to be larger and stronger. So they'll say they're taller, they weigh more, they're more powerful, presumably because, or Dan Fessler argues, because anything that increases our killing power in our mind's eye increases formidability. And formidability across every other animal in the world is pretty much determined by size, right? Bigger animals almost always win competitions. And so, yeah, in hunting, humans are more formidable because they have weapons, right? So if if an animal was watching a safari, as long as the human had a gun, that would and the animal didn't know the human was hunting it, that would be a horror movie to it.
And so, I think one of the, you, I don't know, do you consider yourself an evolutionary psychologist?
Yeah, I think I don't. Yes and no. I would say like I'm not a priest in the evolutionary psychology church, but I do publish some like very traditional Santa Barbara school style evolutionary psychology work. Like I just had a paper accepted to Evolution Human Behavior with some colleagues on the evolution of hatred and breaking it down as like as psychological mechanisms, input outputs, like what are the triggering conditions, what are the behaviors associated with it, kind of like Aaron Sell did with anger. So
Okay.
yes and no. Yeah. I wouldn't freak out if somebody called me an evolutionary psychologist.
Yeah, so I guess I'm just asking you that because early in the book you talk about kind of like the evolutionary game theoretic
Yeah.
context for you know, why we are a morbidly curious about morbidity or morbidly
Yeah.
curious, this sort of thing. Can you talk about that? I mean, it makes sense after the fact, but
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, and I wasn't trained as a psychologist. I was trained in anthropology and biology, right? I didn't take any psych classes. I don't have any psych degrees. But because I study humans in the academic world, that makes me in some ways a psychologist. But I very much think about humans as animals first, and I apply theories and sort of frameworks for understanding behavior from biology more often than I do from psychology. And so this was no different when I started studying morbid curiosity. The first question I asked was, okay, why do we have this? That's the first question. Second question is, do you see anything like it in other animals? And the answer is yes. We see something called predator inspection in most prey animals, especially among mammals. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's when a prey animal will stop and inspect typically their main predator, rather than running away. And at first, it doesn't make any sense, right? Like if you're a zebra grazing along in the savannah and you spot a lion, you would think that like instinctually that zebra should run away. That's like the most adaptive thing it can do, but it's actually not, because lions and zebras live in close proximity with one another, and so do cheetahs and gazelles and pikes and minnows and many other predator prey live in very close proximity with one another. And so the important thing that a prey animal can do is not just run away, but know when they should run away, and know what they should be running from. And the only way to learn about that, especially as a subadult or adolescent prey animal, is to, when the conditions are right, actually learn about your predator, right? So you see this especially among, again, adolescents and subadults, which is who you see in humans going to horror movies typically. You see a lot of predator inspection, and it's not all the time, right? You have to have the right circumstances. You have to be, in the case of like a zebra or gazelle, in a larger group, a bit further away. There are certain environmental factors, like if the grass is high or low. If the grass is really low, you'll spend more time inspecting because you're less likely to get ambushed. But it is a timing situation. And in humans, it's not so much, because we have language, right? We have stories. We can tell stories about predators that we've never experienced, or listen to stories about predators that the storyteller has never personally experienced. And we can learn things about them in a way that's safe. So, if zebras and gazelles had Netflix, they would definitely be watching nature videos, right? That's what they would devour, just like we devour true crime and horror.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's crazy. And so I think I I was wondering about this sort of thing, and the film Predator came
Yeah.
to mind
Yeah,
because
obviously.
I don't know why I'm bringing like film examples, but it's just like I've never thought in detail about why it's something is in a particular genre
Yeah.
before I read this book. So this, in a way, it's a science fiction film.
Yeah, Predator is not really, it doesn't feel like a horror movie when you watch it, right? Not in the way like Alien does. Alien, when you watch Alien, feels like a horror movie. When you watch Predator, there's a few scenes in the beginning where it kind of feels like a horror movie, but a lot of it feels kind of like an action sci-fi film, right?
Yeah. And it's because it's because the power level.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Even though the filmmakers created literally the perfect predator, right?
Yes.
That's like what you would think you would need for a horror movie, and it is an important factor in it. But at the same time, Predator is fighting like Arnold Schwarzenegger, armed to the teeth with his mercenary friends, and that just makes for a different power dynamic. Like a team of highly trained, I think they're like Green Berets or something,
Yes,
led by one of the strongest men in the world, is going to be a more balanced fight than Ripley out in outer space, subject to, again, a perfect predator in the form of the xenomorph, right?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, like a lot of horror movies, they're always defined by the flight, right?
Yeah,
And I feel
yeah.
you're always running away.
Exactly.
You're always like sighing, screaming, running. It's just out of control.
And animals only do that when they're overpowered, right? When they're outmatched. That's the only time an animal runs away, because if they could just if they thought they had a chance, they would fight back. And in horror movies, you only ever see them fight back when they're cornered, which again, that's when like an animal fights back, right? Kind of like we're renovating our house right now, and we had a squirrel that was like in the wall, and we had to catch this squirrel and get it out because we're like tearing the wall out to renovate. And he's super timid, always runs away, right? It's just like a horror movie for the squirrel, until we finally got him in the trap, and then he freaked out. And he was super aggressive, right? Because he was kind of at his last stand, right?
Yeah.
It's the only time in a horror movie when they fight back. And sometimes, and when it's your story, you can make it end however you want. But it's like typically when a protagonist wins in a horror film, they often luck out, right? Or they find one weakness. Like at the last minute, they find a weakness, or they get really lucky, and that's how they win. And typically they don't defeat the monster, right? Typically there's 5 or 6 sequels. So the monster doesn't actually die. It's just like they got away at the last second.
Yeah. It's fascinating. So one analogy that I was thinking also is, so we're interested in, we are interested in horror, and like, actually, it comes up really early on in fiction with Gothic horror,
Yeah.
So, it's a recurrent motif. It kind of reminds me of religion insofar as there are psychological evolutionary theories of religion. Like, why do we have these stories of like these gods and supernatural agents? And there's all these ideas of like, oh, well, we need to observe things in nature. And then our agency detection mechanism is a little exaggerated. It's a little hyperactive. And so we naturally develop these intuitions. You're kind of telling a similar narrative about our fascination with horror.
Yeah. And I talk about in my, I think it's in the chapter on the supernatural. I talk a little bit about religion, and I think there's a similar kind of thing going on. It is about agency detection. That is part of it, but I think I talk about in the chapter that we have not just agency detection, but certain formats in our mind that through which we interpret information that we receive in the world, right? And one of those formats is a social format, whereby we expect agents to have intentions, right? And so they have reasons for why they do things. And this shows up in religion, right? The gods always have reasons for why they've manipulated nature or done these other acts in nature that we then ascribe to some sort of agentic, intentional being, right? So it is agency detection, but it's also agency detection combined with these sort of biases we have to interpret intentions in other people's actions.
Yeah, I mean, I was also thinking about, or I have thought about this, the context in terms of fear and horror, and like this shows up in films again, is light. So you can't, and like I think this is in the Freddy Krueger films. It's often like you're inside, or it's dark, or it's night, and then there's the exact same scene, but it's in the day,
in the
it's
daytime,
in midday, and it's always like a mental shock because you recognize it as the exact same location, but what it evokes in your mind is like totally the opposite, right? And so I think of it where I live here in Austin, Texas. I live near a cemetery, and I go running in that cemetery. I go around dusk, okay, and in the middle of the day, it's like bright and it's hot, and there's all these and I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not like super scared in the middle of the night either, but I can see how someone could be afraid in the cemetery in the middle of the night. And then in the middle of the day, it's just like, oh, there's just like stone slabs all around.
In the middle of the day, you just don't give it a second thought, right?
No.
Like even if you're not afraid at dark, you might give it a second thought. Like you get a slightly different feeling in your body than you do when you're walking through during the daytime, right? But that's there's so two things. One is that it's seems evident why we would be afraid of the dark, right? Because then there's even like a saying with this. It's like it's not the dark I'm afraid of. It's what's in the dark or what could be in the dark, right? So when you're in the dark, I mean, your primary sense as a primate is dulled, right? Your vision is dulled, and so you become more vulnerable, right? And again, anytime you're more vulnerable, there's two individuals interacting, and one is more vulnerable. You have something like a horror movie, right? And so if you're in the dark, you're automatically at a disadvantage to other things that typically hunt in the dark. And in the case of humans, historically, that would have been like wolves, or more often, big cats, which hunt right around dusk. Usually is when they would hunt. But I did see a really interesting paper, and it's been a while since I've read it now, but it was a paper on full moons and why humans have these superstitions about full moons. And it had something to do with like, I think the argument in the paper was that, okay, on a full moon, you can see, it's like bright, right? You can see outside almost like it's daytime in a truly full moon with no clouds. And that's really unfortunate for a predator that hunts at night, right? Because now they're not cloaked, right? You're not at a disadvantage anymore because you can see them. And so the argument in the paper, and they had some empirical data to back this up, was that one reason humans might have this superstition about full moons being like a sign or a bad omen is that predators get really hungry during a full moon because they can't hunt that night. So the next night when they go out, they're extra motivated to kill, to find something to eat. And they had this data showing that like lion kills were more frequent the day after a full moon, or like the 2 days after a full moon. It was super interesting. Like maybe that's where some of these cultural superstitions come from, is that it actually is, or historically it has been like more dangerous to go out the night after a full moon because there's a bunch of predators that couldn't eat the night before.
Yeah. Which, for me, it's obviously common sense in a way, and a lot of psychology people say, "Oh, like you did a study on that." Having fear,
but psychology should be common sense. It would be, there's a few things that are going to be counterintuitive, but like if everything about our mind is counterintuitive, we're probably wrong, right? That's kind of what happened in the sort of replication crisis in psychology. It was like, oh, look at all these counterintuitive findings. They're all wrong, pretty much.
Well, so I think you reported on a case. There was a woman with some lesions.
SM.
Okay. So she couldn't experience fear. Talk about like what that does to someone.
Yeah. So SM is a very famous neuropsychology patient who has probably taught us more about human fear than any other individual. So SM is like her pseudonym, I suppose, because she's obviously a clinical patient. And she had a bilateral amygdala lesion pretty much at birth. And it seems to be relatively isolated to her amygdala, which is assuming that the amygdala is really the defense center of the brain, which is information that we kind of gleaned from studying SM. It makes her the perfect patient to do tests on, right? Because she has this essentially highly controlled knockout is what she is. She's a highly controlled fear knockout. And there's been really fascinating studies with her and like just about her life. Like she lives in a really dangerous neighborhood. And like she, there's been reports of her, like she got robbed on the way home and she wasn't afraid. And the next day after she got robbed on the way home, she walked the same exact path on the way home, which is not something a normal person would do. And so, in this one set of studies, these researchers took her to a couple different places that induce or might induce fear, right? So they took her to this exotic pet shop, and immediately she walked over to the snakes, which is kind of interesting. If you've read, you were asking about evolutionary psychology. If you've read much about snakes and evolutionary psychology, they kind of have a prime spot in the fear literature. She immediately walked over to the snakes unprompted and wanted to pick them up and hold them. And the researchers asked her, they said, don't you know that snakes are dangerous? And she said, yeah, of course I know they're dangerous. But she didn't report feeling afraid of them. In fact, what she reported in the absence of fear was just curiosity, right? So in this woman who cannot experience traditional fear, the only emotion that she self-reported that she felt in these frightening situations was curiosity. So they took her to a haunted house as well, like the kind that I do research at. And again, in the absence of fear, she was just incredibly interested in the scare actors and in their makeup and the monsters, and would go up and want to touch them and touch the makeup. And they asked her again, weren't you afraid? And she said, no, it was very exciting. It was very fun. And I was very curious about the actors. And so this, goes into one of the arguments I make in the book, which is that, you can think of morbid curiosity as a car essentially with a gas and brakes, and your curiosity is your gas and your fear is your brakes. And, you need to have a little bit of both going at the same time. It's kind of like your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. You got to have a little bit of each one going at all times, but sometimes it's more advantageous to hit the brakes a little bit. Sometimes it's more advantageous to hit the gas a little bit. And in the case of SM, she was just full gas with no brakes, all curiosity, but no fear.
Well, okay, so one thing when I was reading about that, I remember this a while ago, but I remember thinking it's a little bit like the dodo, where
Yeah.
it's like if you have no fear, you're gonna get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, you don't live long, right?
Yeah. You're gonna get yourself in trouble. But
or if you don't know about the things, if you're not curious about the things that cause harm to you, you're also not going to live long because you're not going to be very good at evading them or at avoiding them.
Well, this is unrelated to your book and this particular topic, but in a different cultural context, sometimes people don't understand which parts of the city are dangerous or which contexts are dangerous.
Yeah.
And so they don't have any fear; they're just kind of curious, but that's because of ignorance.
Yeah.
They
But
don't.
that doesn't long term would not turn out well, right? If you presumably you would eventually learn which parts of the city were dangerous, right?
Yeah. So what social context? Like for example, there are parts of the world where if you're a single woman, you should not go there alone, unescorted. And there have been cases where Western women, in particular, were naive, and they did. And sometimes it was fine, nothing happened. Like someone saw that they were there, and were like, you need to get out of here, or like, whatever. And then sometimes, rapes and other things happen.
Yeah, and if that story gets out, it becomes a best-selling true crime documentary on Netflix, right? Because that's something that a lot of women would have never guessed. And so when you have a danger that happens in the world, and it's something that you didn't know was dangerous, especially, it's especially it makes you especially curious because your mind is telling you, hey, I was unprepared. Not only did this person die, but like I was unprepared for this. I didn't know that this could even happen, right? There's a danger out there that someone that looks like me and is my age and is similar to me fell victim to that I had no idea about.
Yeah, and so a true crime is you have a chapter about that, and also Otzi the Iceman, which I was interested in because there's a genomic, anthropological, prehistoric angle to that. So Otzi the Iceman was basically a rundown, and like I think it was with bow and arrow.
He had an arrowhead under his collarbone.
Yeah, so he was, and then they just left him, and he was preserved under the ice, and came out, and he was pretty well preserved in the early 1990s. So there's a lot of stuff about him. Yeah, and then more recently, like about 10 years ago, they sequenced his genome, and turned out he's like modern Sardinians because an early European farmer, et cetera, et cetera. But you kind of relate to true crime. And I'm not like a huge fan of true crime, but a couple of years ago, what is it? Serial, podcast, kind of was a big podcast boom about like around a decade ago. But true crime has been around forever. And sometimes I get interested in like for me, I think the true crime that's like super fascinating are things like the Zodiac Killer or Jack the Ripper, and which that are never solved.
Yeah, the ones that we still don't know what happened, right? We don't have a format in our mind for who did this and why.
The Zodiac Killer could still be out there. Probably the Zodiac Killer died. I would bet, but
Ted Cruz's dad, right? Isn't that what?
Oh, you know what? We got a comedian in the house. But no, actually, so Zodiac Killer was killer in the 1970s that would leave these like cryptic, symbols and like write letters. And I think there was a movie about it, and they never discovered who it was. And then, like abruptly, the Zodiac Killer just stopped killing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people believe the Zodiac Killer probably died. Or something happened.
Yeah, he's one of the few that probably got away with it, right?
Yeah. Well, Jack the Ripper. I mean, nobody.
Yeah, Jack the Ripper. Yeah,
nobody knows Jack the Ripper is. We still remember who Jack the Ripper is. I mean, we still remember that story because it was just like so. Okay, so the Jack Ripper combines the macabre elements of the killings. Like the almost anatomical detail, the anatomical fascination of the killer, was like removal of organs and other weird things,
right?
And then also the fact that it was like repeated, and then the fact that it was never solved. makes it very fascinating to people. So yeah, talk about true crime and how it is hooking into our intuitions and our evolutionary sensibilities.
Well, I mean, I knew about Ötzi the Iceman when I started writing the book because I don't know if I told you this, but when I was in undergrad, especially, I was super interested in ancient DNA. Like, I wanted to be in the ancient DNA world. Like, that's what I wanted to do. And so I'd known about Ötzi because he came out. Like, some of the information about him was coming out. The new information was coming out about his DNA around that time. And what interested me about him, and the reason I opened that chapter with him is, he was, a lot of people knew about him, and he was, curiosity to people. But then when they found out that he had been murdered, instantly, like, his story is more interesting. Right now the masses are interested. Oh, well, this guy is like the oldest cold case murder in history, right? So yeah, I thought that was a interesting way to kind of start that chapter, because that's exactly what true crime does. It's as soon as we know there's a story or a mystery that has to do with danger, it becomes more interesting. A lot of people ask me, like, oh, isn't true crime, isn't the driving factor behind its popularity, isn't it the mystery, right? Isn't it the you want to play detective? And the answer is yes, kind of, right? Yes, that is the driving factor, but you then have to ask, like, well, why aren't we that curious about everything, about all mysteries, right? Like, if I asked most people to, tell me how their phone works, almost none of them could tell me. It's a complete mystery, right? If I asked them, how their tennis shoes were made, for most people, that's a complete mystery. They have no idea how their shoes were made. So there's mysteries all around us. The question is, why do some mysteries pull us in and others don't? And the answer that I give in the book is that, well, mysteries that have to do with danger are particularly alluring. Those are the ones that make stories that we have difficulty looking away from, right? And so, okay, where did this come from? Why would we be so interested in particular in other humans who are potentially dangerous? Richard Wrangham, he's a biological anthropologist at Harvard. He has a book called The Goodness Paradox, where he argues that humans have sort of domesticated themselves, right? And the crux of his argument is that when language evolved and became a bit more sophisticated around, kind of very much estimating here, but let's say 300,000 years ago, humans could now plot together to defeat other people more efficiently, right? Other animals obviously work together. Chimps do this in raiding parties, but raiding parties and chimps are more spur of the moment. They're not really planned, right? Human raiding parties are very much planned, and they're very much planned to take place when a victim is least suspecting it, right? And so his argument is that, let's say 300,000 or 400,000 years ago, humans were living more like what chimpanzees live today and other social primates live today, which is sort of a dominant, powerful individual at the top and then a hierarchy below him. And those dominant, powerful individuals can sometimes be tyrants. And of course, any chance to overthrow him that you get, you should take. Well, when you have language, you can now get 3 or 4 people below him in the hierarchy working together to oust him, to overthrow him. And so that did a couple of things, right? That takes individuals who are reactively aggressive. So alpha males are typically very reactively aggressive. If you do something that they consider a transgression, they will react violently in the moment. In chimpanzees, they'll bite you or claw you or scream at you. So those individuals were ousted. That behavioral profile is no longer very adaptive in human societies. What becomes adaptive is being able to plan out your aggression. Now, if those individuals who are planning their aggression are doing it for the right reasons, we like that, right? That's where we get police officers and our military and the sort of good Samaritan who can act violently when he needs to. The problem is that not everyone is a good Samaritan. Not everyone is seeking justice when they're planning their violence. And so the neural mechanisms associated with what's called predatory or premeditative aggression became much more adaptive. But so did, that's also true for individuals who were not very group-oriented, not very pro-social. And so you get the rise of individuals who can become predatory predatorily aggressive, and they don't show any signals of it, right? With reactively aggressive individuals, they tell you they're reactively aggressive, right? They show you they're large, they yell at you, they're socially dominant. It's like really obvious who is reactively aggressive because they're signaling that. Now, with proactive aggression or premeditative aggression, you don't signal anything, right? Because the whole point is to be more inconspicuous. And so if you look at a lot of serial killers in the documentaries, the podcasts, it's almost always the case that family and friends or people who knew them is like, oh, I can't believe he did this. I would have never imagined it, right? And
Well,
you would not get that with like an alpha chimp or an alpha male. You're like, yes, of course Rodney did this. Like, look at him. Look at how he behaves, right? Whereas with proactively aggressive individuals, you don't get that. So the only way to learn about them is to listen to a story about them, right? What were they like growing up? What were they like around people they knew? What clues did we miss? Because they're not signaling their aggression, so we have to go out and find it. And that is the essence of a true crime story. It's why true crime stories focus on the killer so much. It's not because they're glorifying the killer, it's because those details are the ones that are most interesting to us, and those details are the ones that we can use to build this like profile of who might be the next Jeffrey Dahmer or the next Ted Bundy.
Yeah, back when serial killers were a thing, because they're not much of a thing anymore. Again, back when I was a kid, serial
Mhm.
killers are a massive thing. There
Yeah.
are movies about serial killers, and a lot of
Yeah, well, the
documentaries.
70s and 80s were like that was like the golden era, right? It was like pre-DNA, pre-DNA, but still high societal trust, which
Yeah.
is, the sweet spot for a serial killer.
Yeah. So, but they would always. I think it was John Wayne Gacy who killed and murdered boys, raped
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
But he was he was a clown on his
Yeah.
amateur clown. He was involved in Democratic politics in Chicago.
Yep.
And I think someone down the street was like, they did the cliche, he was just a quiet guy,
Yeah.
didn't bother anyone, seems really nice. And,
Yeah, through neighborhood summer parties, people liked him. Yeah.
But I mean, people would make, and there were like sketches, there were sketches like on Saturday Night Live and places that were making fun of it because it would be like, it's like the guy's like digging a hole.
He's in a clown outfit digging holes in his basement, but we didn't suspect anything, right?
The neighbor's like, well, we were wondering what was going on there.
But because he doesn't give these like outward signals of reactive aggression, at least not publicly, we're not getting our mind, in the minds of his neighbors, like he's just maybe a little bit weird, but he's not aggressive.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. Like in the kind of like the counterintuitive aspect of the serial killer is the fascinating. Ted Bundy was handsome and
and charming and charismatic and all of that.
Yeah. So people don't I have when I have looked into true crime things, like sometimes there are those serial killers that would like kidnap people and then just like kill them, and it was like there's no reason, they just like killing people, which is obviously that's abnormal, right?
Yeah, well, and we make the distinction in our justice system, right, between people who again are reactively aggressive and murder someone,
Premeditated
and people
murder.
who are exactly, yeah. So premeditated murder will get you lethal injection, right? That's the only way in the U.S. that you can have a death penalty is if you premeditatively murder someone, if you plan to murder them and you do it. Now, if you reactively murder them, that's still bad. You still might go to prison for life. More likely, maybe you go for 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. But we don't treat it as bad as people who proactively aggress someone. So even in our justice system, we make this distinction between reactive aggression and proactive aggression, and we see proactive as much worse.
Yeah, I mean, proactive is much worse. And then when you have, say, someone like, for example, the targeting of someone like John Wayne Gacy of children, we're talking the power imbalance that you were alluding to earlier. Obviously, that's a classic case. And then a lot of the serial killers, like Ted Bundy, were targeting young women.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, they're targeting vulnerable people, right? Young kids and young women.
Yeah. And so actually talk about I think I don't play video games. What is it? Something about Mortal Kombat apparently had an uncensored version. The video game Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
You just know more than the movie. So the uncensored version and a censored version. I didn't know there was an uncensored version. Like, talk about it.
Yeah. So when Mortal Kombat came out to consoles in like the early 1990s, it was released on the Sega Dreamcast and the Super Nintendo, right? And Mortal Kombat, I'm sure most people who are listening to this probably know at least a little bit about it, but it's a fighting game, a one-on-one fighting game known for its like finishing moves where, you rip the spine out of your opponent and Yes, they're bloody and gory, but in the 1990s they were like very pixelated and not very scary, but violent nonetheless. And Nintendo at the time, and still, I would say, was kind of the family-friendly console, right? They were like the one that you buy for your kids. They have more kid-oriented games, and they didn't want to miss out on the success of Mortal Kombat, but they also couldn't allow a 5-year-old to rip the spine out of his opponent in the video game and have blood spew everywhere. So their compromise was to say, okay, we'll publish your game on our console, which was like one of the most popular consoles in the US at the time, but we're going to make the red blood gray. We're going to call it sweat, and we're going to take out some of the more violent, gruesome finishing moves. Sega, who is very much an underdog compared to Nintendo, I don't know what the ratio was of Dreamcast to Super Nintendo in households, but they were far outnumbered by Super Nintendo. They said, screw it, we'll just publish it as it is. We'll do the whole violent thing, right? Now, when the game came out, the Sega version outsold the Nintendo version like 5-1, despite not being nearly as common in households as the Nintendos. And this caused a lot of drama among parents and even among the U.S. government. So the government, U.S. Senate held a special hearing on violent video games because they were worried that they were going to, corrupt the minds of young kids and the moral foundations of young kids. And the outcome of this meeting was the ESRB, the ratings board for video games. It says, okay, this is rated for kids, or this is rated teens, or this is rated, mature for adults only. But yeah, there was a huge outcry because people were concerned that now that these violent video games could be played in the home, that it was going to corrupt kids from a young age. But of course, if you've followed any of the violent video game literature over the past 2 decades, the outcome of that seems to be that violent video games don't make kids more violent. Violent kids are just violent, and sometimes they like fictional violence too. But playing a violent video game will not make your kids an aggressive jerk.
But I mean that's good to know, I think, for parents. So how does this relate to the aspect of gross out in horror versus more subtle horror? I know, for example, Psycho.
Mm-hmm.
That film didn't really have any gross out.
No,
scenes,
not really.
It was more like
Yeah.
there were knives, but it was more psychological. It was psychological horror, and then you have gross out horror.
Then you have Saw or
and some
Hostel
of these
or-
zombie
yeah.
movies where they're eating brains and stuff like that. Talk about the difference between that and the more psychological horror.
Yeah, so the gross out, I've got a chapter on bodily injuries, right? It's one of the domains of morbid curiosity. The gross out is interesting. So I got that term from Stephen King. So he has a sort of tripartite theory of horror where he says that there is the terror, which he considers the most important type of horror, and the terror is sort of the that is kind of the psychological horror. It's the anxiety that you get that you can build into the environment if you're a horror writer, right? The tension. The second kind is called the horror, which is like when the monster or the villain jumps onto the scene and it's horrifying. And the third one he calls the gross out, and that's kind of the consequence of interacting with the monster. So the bloody bodies and guts strewn about, that's the outcome of the violence. And he doesn't think too highly of that, I don't think. I think his main focus is on the terror. And in the book, I argue that the gross out can actually tell us quite a bit about the terror and the horror, because bodily injuries can tell you something about the thing that caused the bodily injury. So if I'm walking through the woods and I come across a dead body and there's no signs of injury, or maybe there's just a small sign, maybe just like a cut on their, small cut on their neck or something. Or maybe that looks like their neck is broken, but it's not too gory. I'm not too afraid, right? I'm not too concerned about that. But if I come across a body in the woods and it's got both of its arms ripped off and all of its guts are ripped out, I'm going to be terrified, right? Because the thing that is aggressive enough and powerful enough to do that is very, very strong and very mean, and presumably still in the area somewhere. So bodily injuries can tell us something really important about the thing that caused the bodily injury. So the more gruesome the bodily injury is, the more frightened we are, the worse the horror is, and the worse the terror is. And I have a paper I mentioned Dan Fessler earlier. One of the first papers I did in my PhD was a collaboration with him on gruesomeness. But the question was, why are humans sometimes gruesomely violent? Why do we put heads on spikes, and what does that do? Why is that effective? And the answer we got was that gruesomeness seems to convey perceived formidability. So we gave people stories about these individuals who committed crimes, and in some of them, the crimes were gruesome, but didn't require any kind of power. And in other cases, they were not gruesome. So, for example, we gave these people, like in one of the stories, there was like a mushroom forager or something, and he came across this guy, and he killed him. And in the control condition, he just kills him and takes his stuff. And in the experimental condition, he kills him, and then he gouges out his eyes and cuts out his tongue, and then takes his stuff. And it doesn't take any extra power to gouge someone's eyes out when they're dead or cut their tongue out. But when you give two groups these stories, the group that read the story about the gruesome killer, when they were asked to envision him and envision like how tall he was and how large he was and how strong he was, they rated him as taller, larger, stronger than the group who had the same exact story but with no gruesomeness. So bodily injuries seem to index on power, which, again, higher formidability usually indicates more horror, more fear.
Yeah. Obviously that makes sense. And so in terms of horror, fear, and formidability, for those of us that don't watch a lot of horror films, I think some of the most horrifying things that happen in our lives are when we are asleep.
Yeah.
So, segue. But it kind of loops back to Freddy Krueger, because Freddy Krueger also has to do with dreams.
Yeah.
And so dreams and horror do seem to be correct. I mean, this chapter, this section of the book, it kind of like everything kind of fit in, because I think it's something I intuitively felt and knew in terms of my own life and a lot of people's lives. I'm not saying I have nightmares all the time, but just fear, anxiety, the feeling of helplessness, and also the run. That's always the thing. You in dreams where you don't have power, you run away, you escape, and that feels very similar to a horror movie.
Yeah. I almost didn't have a chapter on dreams in my original manuscript draft. I didn't. I talked about dreams like briefly in one of the chapters. I think it was like a paragraph or 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs, and then as I was doing my revisions, I was like, you know what, there's actually like a lot more interesting stuff here. And I started writing more about it, and turned it into its own chapter. But yeah, that chapter is all about the fact that some of the earliest forms of morbid curiosity might have been in the form of nightmares. There's a really interesting theory out there about the evolution of dreams by this Finnish neuroscientist. I'm going to butcher his name, but I think it's Antti Raivansuo. He's a philosopher and neuroscientist, and he has this threat simulation sort of theory of dreaming, where he posits that the neural mechanisms required for dreaming, because dreaming is pretty complex, right? Like you're fully simulating an experience when you dream. You're even simulating the physical aspects of it. Like if you didn't cut off the signal to your muscles, you would get up and walk around. It's what happens in people who sleepwalk, right? You would physically act out your dreams, and there's studies with animals showing this. If you sever that particular connection, animals will get up and actually act out their dreams. So when you have a dream, you are fully engaged as if it is a real scenario, both cognitively and physically. And that's a really curious thing, because that's pretty, one, that's like kind of energetically costly, and two, that would be really, really hard to build in an organism if it didn't have a purpose, if it didn't have a reason to exist, right? I think I made a point in the chapter that like dreams are really weird. They're very surreal, but they appear to be directed, right? Like David Lynch films, like they're very bizarre, and you don't know what they mean, but they obviously have some kind of direction and seem to have a purpose. And it's something that cultures all across the world throughout time have always wondered, right? Like, why do we dream? What do they mean? Can we predict the future? Does it say something about ourselves? Does it say something about the gods? And I think we still are in the same place that like our ancestors were 10,000 years ago. We have no clue why we dream. But I think one interesting hypothesis for why we started dreaming is Raivansuo's threat simulation theory. And he argues that, again, in order for this really complex machinery to have evolved, it probably would have needed a clear survival purpose. And one of those purposes might be the rehearsal of reactions to threats. In particular, the sort of building those neural pathways to respond to threats, right? laying those down, almost like when you practice violin, you're laying down neural pathways for muscle memory for the violin. When you're having these crazy dreams or you're running away, you're sort of practicing, I guess, cognitively, but also consciously, if you remember it when you wake up, the threats that you might encounter. And, it's interesting because dreaming appears to be like very, very evolutionarily old because there's good evidence that like mice dream. There's a really fascinating study I talk about in the chapter where you can actually see mice imagining potential possible futures and then dreaming about it based on the neurons that are firing. They have them wear these cute little mouse helmets that measure brain waves. And there's evidence that octopuses will actually dream, right? Or they do something like dreaming. And that's particularly interesting because we're something like 500 million years, diverged from the last common ancestor with an octopus. So if cats and rats and octopus and humans all dream, it suggests that it's probably something that's very evolutionarily old and for whatever reason has been conserved across time. And one of those reasons might be that it's, in some cases, could be, or at least historically could have been useful for us.
Yeah, I mean that's fascinating. If it was a conserved feature of the brain, although to be fair, I think cephalopods,
Yeah.
just that whole group, and mammals,
Completely diverged neurologically, yeah, which would mean that it evolved probably at separate points even across
like the
the
eyes. I'm talking, the eyes in particular, right? People talk about how the eyes are similar, but they're not like from a common derived eye.
No, they're not. Yeah. So I guess my point there would be that so an octopus probably their dreaming would have evolved maybe some what do you call that when it's evolution for different for same purpose in different organisms? Convergent evolution.
Yeah.
Probably some convergent evolution with them.
Yeah.
But even if you imagine like, okay, let's say octopus is probably different, probably true. Cats and rats, we have good evidence in both of them that they dream, and in particular, they have a lot of nightmares, or at least they dream about a lot of threats.
Yeah.
Cats and rats, I forget. I cited in the book. I think it's like 40 million years or something for last common ancestor for them. And presumably that is something that's conserved among mammals. And again, it may not be. And if it's convergent evolution, to me, that's even more interesting because it means this thing is like evolved multiple times to serve presumably a similar purpose.
Yep. Well, yeah, similar external purpose, like interferes. And also, I mean, I don't want to go down the cephalopod track too much, but it's like they have big eyes.
Yeah.
They can be, some of them are quite social.
Yeah. They're smart.
They're dexterous in the world.
Yep.
So
they're very similar to humans in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So they might have like some of the same environmental like pressures, and so this dreaming and this morbidity, fear might have evolved just for the same reasons.
Yeah, planning for the future, right? Planning for future interactions. Yeah.
So I mean, I guess I want to go back to talking about my childhood and horror movies and the benefits, I guess, of like morbid curiosity for children, which today because of helicopter parents. I mean, I know a lot of parents who like totally shield their children from scary things, which is in the past, like stories in our society that children also knew about were quite scary, and it was just understood and accepted. It wasn't a big deal. But today, people hide death, and they hide all sorts of things. They hide bad words in schools. I know my kids' schools, the teachers Bowdlerize words that imply war or killing or fighting.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, once you have kids, you will see what some teachers think, which is they don't. But
it's just they don't.
They don't. They're not thinking about it. But I obviously I don't obviously you might not be able to figure it out from me, but I don't agree with that. I think kids need to know reality. They need to know the world.
Yeah,
they need to know they need to know that homeless people exist. They need to know that war exists. They need to know that murder exists. Because there are dangers in the world. I mean, this is common sense, but why don't you talk about what your take was in the book?
Yeah, that's probably the most common like concern that I get when people email me or talk to me in interviews. They'll say, "Well, what about kids?" Right? Like, okay, this is all fine for adults, but with kids, I mean, should we really be exposing them to these violent, gruesome, stories of suffering? My answer is yes. We definitely should. For the same reason that you just said, right? But two reasons really. I mean, one is that kids are kind of primed and ready to learn. Like they're much better learners than adults, right? Kids are naturally very curious, naturally just like sponges, like they soak up information. And one of the things they're really curious about is death and danger and violence, right? I tell a story I open that chapter about kids with a story about my experience with a bunch of 5 to 8-year-olds being very imaginatively violent in a game we were playing. And it's like I was trying to be PG and tell this story as part of the game where it was like, it was the game Mafia or Werewolf, if you've ever played it. And it's kind of a violent, I guess, imaginative game, but I was being very PG with it. And when I let the kids tell the story, it turned into like this bloody gore fest, right? Where they were ripping arms off and stabbing people and ripping their guts out. And the kids loved that. They were cheering and laughing. And, for them, it's a very safe way to experience these things that are obviously they don't want to experience in real life, right? If you leave kids to their own devices, they play games that to them are very scary. They play a lot of Predator formatted games, things like even like tag and hide and seek, right? Like not very scary to adults, but to a young kid, that's at its fundamental level a game about, in the case of tag, somebody is it and they're trying to get you, and if they get you, you're dead, right, or you're out. And in hide and seek, you're hiding from someone who's hunting you, which is just a very basic predator prey format.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think kids love those kinds of things because it's probably good for them to be exposed to things that are risky for them to engage in otherwise. It's why thrilling and adventurous play are good for kids, right? It teaches them how to deal with feelings of fear and feelings of anxiety when they're young, so that when they face things in the real world as adults that are scary or anxiety inducing, they know how to handle those emotions, right? So if your kids don't, if you shield your kids from all forms of fear and all forms of anxiety, you give them the perfect childhood, when they become adults, they're going to probably look like a lot of 18 to 25-year-olds today look, which is kind of anxious and unable to handle stresses in the real world.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
and it's not bad intentions, right? Like, most parents that are doing that because they want their kids to have, like, to be happy, right? They want them to, like, not experience fear, not experience anxiety, because we usually don't want to experience those things, but it's important to experience them in a playful, safe way, especially when you're young, because it does lay the foundation for those emotion regulation skills.
Well,
that are important for handling it.
One thing I was thinking about when I was, reading about this is allergies, food allergies, where people kept kids away from, say, peanuts.
Yeah, exactly.
Allergies, but it turns out that resulted in the allergies. And like now, because it is,
it makes perfect sense, right? If your immune system has never seen that thing, and then suddenly it's in everything you eat, like it's going to react violently to that, right? It's going to look like an intrusion. Same thing with just generally fear and anxiety. It's going to feel like a thing that shouldn't be there, and you don't know how to handle it. You're not prepared.
Yeah. Well, also, going back to Nightmare on Elm Street, part of the Freddy Krueger legend, lore, I guess, legendarium is, the kids would sing about Freddy Krueger. He was,
it's a child game. It's like Ring Around the Rosie.
Yeah. Because he was a child murderer. He was
like a pedophile, right? He was like a pedophile or something. Yeah.
But they would sing it. They would talk. They were like, it was something they talked about, like children. They might not understood all the details, and it was obviously terrifying, but it was like part of their lore.
Yeah, again, like Ring Around the Rosie is a game about the plague, or a song about the plague,
or the Boogeyman.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. The Boogeyman. The thing is like you don't have to explain the Boogeyman in detail to any child; they intuitively understand what the Boogeyman is.
Well, that's part of the fear of it, right? Like they don't know what the Boogeyman is, right? He's just a thing that will come and get you. Because if you explain it and you understand it, then they can find ways to overcome it, right? But if it's just this like nebulous boogeyman, then he's frightening.
Yeah, and they're not that little anymore, but when they were little kids, it was kind of one of those things, like they were super scared, but they also thought it was funny and they were curious about it.
Like they kind of know, like, okay, Dad's not going to let me get eaten by this thing, but also the thing he's describing is very scary.
And that's all normal. That's all normal.
Yeah, it's normal.
But today, kids are being shielded from this sort of stuff, and I guess we're seeing. What it's like. It's like. The story of the Buddha, how his father shielded him from suffering.
No, tell me.
Yeah, so his father shielded him from like suffering and death and old age and all these things because. I think there was like a prophecy that he was going to confront them
Okay.
Well, I mean, anyway, I'm garbling it. The listener is going to get like annoyed, but the point of the story is, I think at one point he sees an old man. He's like, "Oh my God, what is that?" You know, and the
Yeah.
point is like, you can't shield your kids from scary things. There
Yeah.
are scary things in the world, you
Yeah.
know, and they need to be resilient, right? Like this is how
Yeah.
resilience emerges.
Well,
Yeah,
the whole point of childhood, presumably, is to prepare you for adulthood, right? Then every animal, that's like what you do as a juvenile. That's what play is for. Like most animals, their species-specific forms of play prepare them for things they're going to do in the world. Like if you have a cat at home, how does your cat play? Well, typically they like to crouch around and sneak around. And, if they hit a toy under a door, they'll reach under the door to try to get it, almost like they're reaching their paw inside of a hole, or instead of going around the door and just getting the toy, right? If you have a dog at home, what do? Well, they typically run after things because dogs are what are called coursers, right? That's how they find their prey, and when they find prey, they just chase it. Cats don't do that. Cats stalk prey and then leap out at the last minute. And so cats and dogs, if you put them together, they often don't play well together because they don't understand each other's play style, right? They have these these play styles that are very different because they have adult lives that are kind of different as far as how they hunt.
yeah. No, that totally makes sense. Um, we've been talking for a while, and so obviously, I'm glad that the book is out. You put a lot of work into this. It's a page turner. It's fascinating. There's a lot of interesting topics, and it kind of it's not abstract. It like really hooks into our morbidly curious really hooks into our lived experience in our lives. And so I guess I'm curious, what was the most surprising thing to you? You go to these haunted houses,
Yeah.
you read this literature,
Yeah.
think about this. I mean, this is your world for a
Yeah.
while. What was the most surprising thing as you were working on this?
Um, I think there were a few things. I mean, one of them, which now, like looking back, makes a lot of sense, but especially given what we just talked about. But one of the early things I found was that uh, horror fans are sometimes higher in anxiety than, and morbidly curious people are sometimes higher in anxiety than people who are not horror fans or people who are not morbidly curious, at least at some point in their life. And, it didn't make a lot of sense to me at first. Like, okay, if you're feeling anxious, why would you seek out a thing that is intended to scare you or make you feel more anxious? And, the answer now that I've come to seems to be that a lot of horror fans find comfort in these things because it offers them kind of an off ramp for these cycles of rumination that you can get into, in particular with generalized anxiety disorder, where you're feeling anxious, but you haven't really attached the anxiety to any kind of threat in the world. And so that causes your brain to kind of ramp up its vigilance attention mechanisms, causes you to feel more anxious, right? That's how you get in these cycles that are really difficult to get out of. And a lot of horror fans seem to be able to use horror as a way to get out of it, because it's a threatening story. And so your mind is able to latch onto that more easily than it is a calming story. And then after 90 minutes, the story's over, the threat goes away, your parasympathetic nervous system that allows you to kind of rest and digest kicks in and sort of physiologically calms you down. And we see this in, studies have done at haunted houses. We see it with horror fans. There's a game called Mind Light that a lab developed, and it's a horror game for kids. And it tells a very similar story where kids who play this game who have been diagnosed with anxiety have decreases in anxiety that mirror cognitive behavioral therapy. So it's as effective in these randomized control trials as cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the gold standard for treating anxiety. So there seem to be a lot of benefits. So it's not just that it's not harmful, but there actually seem to be some possible benefits to being morbidly curious or being a horror fan. And I didn't necessarily expect that. I was kind of open going in. I was like, okay, this could be bad for you, right? I mean, same thing with empathy. That was the other surprising thing. Like I went into this thinking like, okay, it could be the case that morbidly curious people and horror fans are just lower in empathy. Like that's very possible. It's certainly the go-to answer for a long time. And then I published a study last year where it was like a set of 3 or 4 studies showing that's just not the case. If anything, they score actually a bit higher in cognitive empathy. They score just like everyone else in affective empathy. So, you feel what others feel. And they tend to score lower in levels of cold-heartedness. So they're caring about the well-being of another person, right, is kind of the inverse of cold-heartedness. So in every measure that I've given them, they seem to either look like the general population or they score a bit higher in these measures that we find important in society, like compassion and empathy and that was kind of surprising to me. It was a relief, but it was, kind of surprising.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like, just reading your book, it's kind of like it's therapeutic.
Yeah.
That's what I would say. An easy, quick way to say it. I guess like the last thing I just want to mention is I recently read Robert Fagel's Iliad,
Mm.
and actually I listened to it, which was actually better, I think,
Yeah.
because
So that's how it's meant to be heard.
yeah, and I was thinking about there's parts of the Iliad where so Achilles, wh- so some parts of the Iliad, listening to it felt heroic, but some
Yeah.
of it was not heroic.
Yeah.
And then when I, thought back, because I reviewed your book again. Yeah, I went through it just real quickly because refresh,
Yeah.
because
Sure.
it was a while ago, and I was like, oh yeah, the Achilles parts where he's fighting Hector, like it's kind of horrifying, and that's why it's different. It's because I mean, first of all, I knew what was going to happen, but also even if you didn't know what was going to happen, Achilles is so overpowered,
Yeah.
as a fighter, that it's not really heroic for
Yeah.
people to fight him. It's like you're insane,
Yeah. It's not David and Goliath. It's like a, it's a death wish, right?
Yeah, yeah, and like you can tell that like Hector knows that it's over.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
he's trying to avoid fighting him because he knows that it's not possible. Like
Yeah.
this is and so when you're talking about horror as a genre and sealing it off from everything else, but it's like it's already threaded into the narrative.
Oh, yeah.
The oldest
Yeah.
narrative that we have.
You can have, and many stories do have horror elements, right? Most good stories have horror elements. Almost every story has a villain, right? It's hard to find a story about anything that doesn't have a bad guy. And at parts of the story, the bad guy's stronger, right? He's more powerful. I think what differentiates horror is that is the thread throughout the story, is that the
Yeah.
bad guy is
That's
stronger,
not
more
the
powerful.
story. It's not a part of
That
the
is the
story.
story itself, right? Whereas in other genres, you get like a taste of that, and then the hero, has something happen to them, or they get some allies, or they train, or whatever. That's more of the hero's journey, right? Like you get a hero's journey in other films, or other stories. Whereas in horror, you don't really get a hero's journey. It's not really the format of a horror story. It's kind of like the first part of the hero's journey, and it just never they never actually get stronger, right? They never actually overcome the
exactly.
threat.
Well, I've been talking a lot about films. Obviously, I don't read horror fiction. I mean, that must be a whole different thing. So when I think of horror, like for me, the ambiance, the setting, the mood is really important. So like in a horror film, like you don't have like bright lighting. It just wouldn't work.
It wouldn't work, right? Yeah, it wouldn't work.
Like often it's at night or it's in like dark.
The music is very tense, right? There's a hilarious cut of The Office out there where they put like typical horror music to The Office supercut, and it looks like a scary movie. Then it looks like a thriller at least, because it's about how you cut it and how you set the scene, right? How you set the atmosphere.
Yeah. Well, so you've been working on this for a while. What directions in your research are next, Colton?
Well, probably, the book is really not about horror movies. I talk a lot about horror movies in it because it's obviously relevant to being morbidly curious, and it's kind of that's like the outlet that most people are morbidly curious in their daily life, right? They watch true crime or they watch horror movies or read scary books. Like that's kind of how they engage in morbid curiosity on a daily basis, or listen to scary news or whatever. But I think a lot of my research now, especially with the other stuff I'm doing, is kind of gotten into horror more specifically, like horror the genre. So this new paper that I've got with Edgar Dubourg on the computational logic of fear, using horror movies as an example of that. That's kind of the direction it's going now. I've got this film festival that I organize. It's a horror film festival. I've got a spooky brick and mortar store here where I live in Eureka. So a lot of my world now kind of revolves around horror.
Eureka, where? Which Eureka?
Eureka Springs, Arkansas.
Yes, okay, that's right. I want to double check. Yeah, I do.
Eureka, California. There's a couple different. Yeah.
You have a horrifying life, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a lot of the stuff I do now revolves around horror as a genre a bit more, and so I'm getting more interested, especially after publishing this paper, or writing this paper with Edgar. It opened up a lot of research opportunities and interesting ideas about like thinking about how we tell stories, right? Like the different kinds of stories we tell. Like, what is a horror story? So that's one area. And then also, I mean, now Edgar and I are looking at the same thing, but with sci-fi. Like, okay, well, what is a sci-fi story then? How do
Nice.
if horror is this, then what is a sci-fi story?
Yeah.
What is a thriller? What is an action? And so I think getting more into like the science of storytelling or storytelling and story consumption, and kind of what it means psychologically is something I'm super interested in.
Awesome, man. Well, it was nice catching up with you. I hope to see you in the flesh sometime soon.
Yeah,
Maybe I'll go up to Arkansas.
you should.
And
Hang
like
out.
everyone should check out the book, Morbid Curiosity. It's out there. Find bookstores or on the
Yeah.
interwebs. Check it
Anywhere you
out.
buy books.
Yeah, it's a fast read. It's dense.
Yeah, it's not
a
too
lot of
long.
information. But if you like the understanding how we generate narrative and a particular aspect of that, it's like this is a book you should read.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, take care, Colton.
All right, you too.
This podcast for kids